Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to our session regarding the Islam Study Circle. The Quranic verse that we're going to discuss today relates to Surah Baqarah, and the verse that I've chosen is verse 216. As you can see, it's being displayed in your screens. So the verse is وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And it may well be that you may dislike a thing even though it is better for you. And it may well be that you like a thing even though it is bad for you. And God knows the reality, but you do not know. My dear participants, this is an extremely important Quranic verse and gives us tremendous guidance on our everyday living, especially because we as human beings tend to get depressed, tend to get disappointed and dejected when we see that what we had expected does not happen. And when something happens which we do not expect, we become sad, we become depressed, and we do think that the world has turned against us. So this Quranic verse gives us guidance and tells us that at times there are things that you think are good for you and you expect them to happen, but they don't happen because God thinks that if they had happened, they might well have done something bad for you, and vice versa as well. At times, something evil has happened, something bad has happened to you, and you think that something has really gone wrong. But in reality, out of this darkness, light emerges, and you find that instead of everything getting lost, you actually find or refine and regain a lot of things. So this is a place that we need to trust God. This is a place, this is an issue in which we need to understand that God, who is the grand schemer, God, who is actually the creator of this universe, who is our creator, he always wishes well for us. Even if there are trying circumstances, the end result is something which he wishes should happen in our favor. So sometimes we think that things have happened badly, but out of that evil, out of that darkness, as I said, light emerges. So we need to trust God. And there are so many instances, I think, that you might have experienced in your own lives that you had wished something to happen, but it did not happen. And at that particular time, we were very sad and very disappointed. But after a certain point of time, we realized that it was very good that it did not happen because such and such things would have then ensued. And we, in our own limited knowledge, were thinking that something would really be disappointing for us. A very common example, viewers, that I often give when I study this verse and teach this verse is a famous happening that occurred in one of the airlines, in which it was supposed to, aircraft was supposed to travel from one city to another city, and a business tycoon was supposed to board the aircraft and go for a very important meeting. And such was this important meeting that a huge stake was dependent on it, maybe thousands of dollars. And the meeting was to finalize that particular deal. And the only thing was that this gentleman had to fly from one city to another city to reach there and then sign the agreement and gain a lot out of this deal. And it so happened that somehow he got delayed in reaching the airport. And when he reached the airport, the closing of the aircraft had already been announced. And he was not able to make it to the aircraft. And in spite of his pleadings and his shouts and his cries that he had a very important meeting to attend, and if they could just allow him, because there's still about 10 minutes to go. But the airline said that their policy is that they close the doors 15 or 20 minutes before takeoff, and hence now they're not going to open it. And this guy knew that if he misses this meeting, he misses this important meeting, something, then he's really had it. He'll have to pay some penalties as well, and the very lucrative deal that he was supposed to reap would also end up in complete fiasco. And then what happened? Something very bad happened. The aircraft actually had a very, very severe crash. Every person on board died. Every person on board died. And lo and behold, this gentleman who was supposed to go there, who was wailing and crying and showing his dejection that he never made it, was of course still lived because he never boarded the aircraft. So, in hindsight, he could understand that God had actually saved him. So, but when the actual issue was happening, he was thinking that God is being unkind to him. So this is a very common example, and I'm sure all of you must have gone through many similar examples in which things happen, and when they happen out of unexpectation, and especially when something which hurts you results, we often lose hope in God. So this is a very good example to show that how at times we don't trust God for what happens, but in reality it ends up or it augurs well for all of us. And the reverse is also true. At times, asa an tuhibbu shay'an wa huwa sharrun lakum. That at times we expect something good to happen and it does not happen. And God says the reason for that is that had it happened the way we had intended, something evil would have actually touched us. So God never made it come true, never made it realize. And then you see the verse closes on a very, very important and emphatic note. It says, "Wallahu ya'lamu wa antum la ta'lamun." In reality, God knows about the future. He knows what's going to happen, and you don't. So the bottom line is that you need to trust God. You have to have this faith in God that if something is happening which perhaps is going against our wishes, or something bad is happening, whether something bad is happening, or whether we think that something good should have happened, and at times we think that that has not happened. In both cases, we need to realize that God's will, when it prevails, it has benefits for all of us. God is merciful. God is our greatest well-wisher. He can never wish ill for us, even in trying circumstances. The purpose is at times to bring us closer to Him or to gain more reward by doing good deeds, especially when we are in troubled circumstances. So, all in all, basically, we have to realize that the Almighty, He has always thought of His creation as as just as a person would do regarding someone who he owns or who he thinks should ultimately end up as successors or who should succeed in life. So the bottom line here is that this is a very, very important Quranic lesson that if we end up in failure or if we end up in situations which we do not expect to happen, we must not get dejected because, as I said, from darkness often light emerges and we don't realize that. Let me give you another example. In the times of the Prophet Muhammad, we know that the incident of Ifk took place in which Aisha, radiallahu anha, one of the wives of the Prophet, she was blamed of adultery. And the Quran says that you should not make this incident feel as if this incident is totally bad for you because something good will come out of it. تَحْسَبُوهُ شَرٌّ لَكُمْ وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. Something to this effect, the Quran says that you think that it is evil for you, but out of this evil, out of these trying circumstances, something good will emerge, and of course that would be that a lot of directives were revealed for the for to exonerate Aisha, and similarly, the Quran says that out of this incident, the Prophet could recognize his friends from his foes because often in these trying circumstances that you're passing through, you know who is your real friend and who is your real foe. So there are many benefits which, of course, do arise. And in this case of false accusation regarding Aisha in this particular matter, the Quran also said that don't think that this is something bad has happened to you. Out of this bad, something good is going to emerge. And as I said, the good that emerged was that friends and foes were distinguished. People knew who they were up against. And also the fact that as a result of this, the exoneration of Aisha was revealed from the Almighty, and He Himself took charge of the affairs and also revealed directives in this regard so that such things are circumvented in future. So, dear viewers, this is an object lesson that we must understand that as far as the Quran is concerned, as far as our lives are concerned, we don't have much control of our lives on many occasions. And when something unexpected happens, we do tend to get dejected. So the bottom line is that we have to see that silver lining in that dark cloud. There is a silver lining, of course. And as I said, if all of us look back in hindsight, retrospectively, on some of the bad things that had happened, and at that time we thought that they should not have happened, but later on we realized that it is excellent, it is very well that those things happened, because ultimately whatever happened was actually in our favor. Because now we go on to the next part of our study circle, and that is the hadith of the day. The hadith that I have selected is from the Al-Jami of Sahih of Imam Muslim. And this narrative, viewers, is also something that we, all of us, need to keep ourselves afresh and keep this narrative in mind. So the narrative says, An Abi Malik al-Ashri قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الطهور شطر الإيمان. So the words are, Abu Malik al-Ashari stated that God's messenger said, cleanliness is part of faith. So you can clearly see that a religion whose ultimate purpose is the purification of the soul lays equal stress on physical purification itself. So physical hygiene, physical cleanliness is something regarding which the Prophet was extremely careful about. He would caution and prod and emphasize upon Muslims that they must remain clean. They must have clean bodies. They must wash their faces. They must wash their mouths, thoroughly gargle, so that our own voice and our own interaction with people is such that we don't have a breath of bad air when we talk to other people. He was equally insistent regarding our body hygiene, and that is why we know that as a prophet also he gave us directives which meant that we must observe cleanliness. Thus, for example, the paring of nails or the cutting of nails is one of them. Circumcision is also another of them. Then shaving our pubes is also because of this fact that this cleanliness has to be maintained. So cleanliness has been emphasized, has been stressed in such a emphatic way that all of us need not only to practice this, but we have to transfer this thought to the next generation as well. And as we can see, that this is something which is so close to our own nature. No one would like to remain filthy. Filth is something which is always repulsive to all of us, and hence religion has also emphasized that as soon as you see yourself indulging in things which are perhaps making you unclean in any way, you must clean yourself. So physical hygiene is such an important thing that this particular narrative says that it is part of our faith. Now, this is a very important thing, that the Prophet says that cleanliness is part of our faith. And this, of course, does not merely mean that we need to remain clean ourselves. That of course, is a given. But as an end product, our own atmosphere, the room that we live in, the place that we work in, the parks that we go to, the public places that we may go for our entertainment. So they are all consequences of the fact that this cleanliness has to be extended to all these areas. So cleanliness is a tenet of faith. It is part of faith. And if we realize this, and if we also transfer this thought to our younger generation, we can only tell them that how important, how significant cleanliness is. And this physical hygiene is so important that at times it has been made mandatory upon us, for example, to do wudu, which of course is another form of this cleanliness, that when we have to pray before the Almighty, we have to do the ceremonial ablution just because of the fact that we have to be ceremonially clean as well. And of course, then in some other cases, taking a bath has been made compulsory, precisely for this reason. So we need to understand that this is a very important tenet of our religion. Cleanliness, which is often understressed, which is often not perhaps given an extended treatment, is something that we need to realize is part of our faith. We have to remain clean. We have to remain pure. And you know what? At one instance, the Quran has said, "Inna Allah yuhibbul mutahhirin, wa yuhibbul mutatahhirin," which means that the Almighty loves people who keep themselves pure and also loves those who can keep themselves pure by repenting before the Almighty. So cleanliness is actually uh, uh, is compared to repentance. It is as if we are washing ourselves from sins. So we need to understand that cleanliness is something which has tremendous importance, and it's not just a question of physical hygiene. It's much more than that, and that is that it has been regarded as part of our faith. Because now we move on to the next part of our study circle, and that is the Bible verse of the day. And the verse that I have selected is from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter number 6. In fact, these are two verses, verse 22 and verse 23. So the verse says, "The light of the body is the eye. If then your eye is true, all your body will be full of light. But if your eye is evil, all your body will be dark. If then the light which is in you is in dark, if then the light which is in you is dark, how dark it will be." So it's again a very symbolic passage from the Bible, and the prophet Jesus has actually again uh, directed our attention to the fact that the eye is the lamp of the body. It is through this lamp, that we see the world. And if we remain pure, if we want to remain pure, then our eyes have to remain pure. But if our eyes start to lust after things, then this evil of the eye is transferred to our heart as well, and our body becomes dark. So, eye is like a lamp. When you see good things, when you look at good things, they have an effect on your body. When you look at evil things, that has an effect on your body. And of course, this is something that we all experience. And this is precisely in tandem with the purification that we were just discussing. So, just as we need to purify our body, just as we need to purify ourselves, our physical selves, we need this this spiritual purification as well. It is this spiritual purification which brings us closer to the Almighty. We feel as if we are spiritually closer to Him. We feel enhanced in our spiritual experience. And this is precisely what the prophet Jesus has said here, that the eye is the lamp of the body. So we have to maintain this cleanliness of the eyes. Our eyes must not take liberty. We know that Jesus, at another instance, has also remarked that if we lust after women through our eyes, it is as if we have done adultery of the eyes. And this is something which is, of course, forbidden at the very start. So we need to understand that the Quran also stresses this cleanliness of the eye, or that our gaze should not take any undue liberty, because it is the eye, as the prophet Jesus has just said, that is the lamp of our own body. If we look evil, if we look at evil things, evil thoughts will arise in us. They will contaminate our soul. And if our soul gets contaminated, then of course we become further away from the Almighty. We lose that kingdom of paradise, or we tend to lose it. We have the kingdom of paradise is put into jeopardy, and hence we need to understand that this is something which is really a test. And I think we have discussed this before as well, that when we grow up and when our children grow up, there are two very important tests that each of us have to go through as we become adults. One of them relates to our conscience, and that is that we have to follow our conscience. And the other one relates to our eyes, and that is that we must keep our eyes pure. We must keep them as pure as possible, because, as Jesus has said, that eyes are the lamp of our body. If we keep ourselves, if keep our eyes clean and pure and shining, we'll find that our inner selves is also pure and radiant and shining. And this, as I said, is a spiritual experience which makes us closer to the Almighty. It brings us closer to the Almighty. It gives us this charm. It gives us this satisfaction that we are doing something which is really, really spiritually fulfilling. So, dear viewers, this brings us to an end to this first section of our study circle. And before we move on to the next session, I think that if you have any questions, I'll first take up those questions, and then we can perhaps proceed into the next part. Kindly raise your hands if you have any questions, so that okay. I see Nazir Ahmed, Mr. Nazir Ahmed. I have unmuted your mic. Please go ahead with your question.
Thank you very much for a wonderful lecture, the first part. My question is about that, about the ayat of Quran.
Right.
Sometime it's something like that. It's the we satisfy ourselves that
Mm-hmm.
this thing will not happen with us. So it's the it will be good in the future for us. Sometime we interview for someone, or sometime we fail for the promotion, and we
Right.
think better for us. So we only satisfy ourselves because we can't do anything. Then okay, it's the will of the God. Okay, satisfy yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But scientifically, it's not happening good because
Mm-hmm.
someone else is promoted or someone else get the good job, and definitely it's good for them, but not for me. So, what
Mm-hmm.
about your answer on this?
Right. So that you made a very good point. Actually, you see, when we say that something has happened against our will, and we at time resign ourselves and submit ourselves by simply saying, "Okay, it was God's will." This does not actually condone the fact that whatever we have to do, we should just leave it to God. You see, this is the this is the attitude that we adopt once something happens. But before it happens, we have to give it our best try. You see, when something unexpected happens, we if it happens because of our own mistake, for example, if we had not worked hard enough, or when we were not adopting the proper strategy, this situation is entirely different. So this particular verse actually tells us that if you had tried your best, you did your part, and nothing was missing from your part. You did your hard work, you did your experience, you involved your experience, you discussed your matter with other things. Everything which should have been done was done by you. You did the needful, and in spite of that, the results were not as you expected them to happen. It is then that you need to understand that certain things, if they don't happen, then there is this will of the Almighty that we need to understand. And that will, of course, at times in hindsight, we do realize. So this is not tantamount to the fact that we should just drop our heads and resign to God. Before that actual happening, we have to exert our intellect. We have to exert everything which is needed to be exerted. And then if the result doesn't happen in favor, it is here that we need to understand that it is perhaps God's interference, and He does not want it to happen. And as I said, I think you must have realized in your own life as well that there are so many things that happen when you look back at them, you always think that it is good that it did not happen. So my clarification is that this scenario and this situation actually presupposes the fact that we had done all that was needed to be done. We were not slack, we were not lazy, we did not make a wrong policy. So everything done to the best of our ability. In spite of that, if we ended in a fiasco or a failure, then there is something which God had in mind. He had some other plans for us. That's what we need to understand. So I have now uh, Ms. Rafia Khwaja. Kindly unmute your mic. So you need to unmute your mic, please. Yes, please go
Can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
They say that अल्लाह ने इंसान की फितरत में बहुत कुछ डाला हुआ है. What does
Right.
this mean कि अल्लाह ने फितरत में डाला? What does फितरत mean?
Fitra actually in Arabic is translated generally in English as human nature. The human nature is something in which the Almighty has ingrained the awareness of good and evil. And of course, the fact that when we know what right and wrong is, this is that innate guidance. This is this guidance which is with which we are born with, and this is what we call the guidance of human nature. That we do know what right and wrong is, and then at times we also should supplicate or supplement this by saying that the Almighty has also given us this common sense. So if you extend your own human nature to this common sense, then that intellect and your sense both are something which are given to you as a gift from the Almighty, and they are your tools through which you can analyze, through which you can judge, through which you can traverse the terrain of life.
So it means कि आप जो आप गलत काम अगर करते हैं तो this is not in your fitrat.
You see, our human nature has the awareness of good and evil. Uh, we have the choice to select. We have the freedom to select between good and evil. So if we do something evil, we do it by choice. No one forces us to do evil. So we have this awareness of what good and evil is in our nature, and then it is our own free will which makes decision that whether we ultimately adopt good or ultimately adopt evil.
So this is by birth. We are born with a certain intuition to do what is the correct thing.
Right. Absolutely right.
Thank you so much.
So I see no other hands or as the Okay, so let's move on to the next part of our study circle. And this actually relates to the fact that some of the misconceptions that often come across the label or they are given the label of Islam. So the misconception that I'm discussing today especially relates to something that we often come across as parents and as people who at times get sick or have some ailment. And this is the issue, what we call as the issue of the evil eye, which is called the Nazare Bad in our Urdu language. And Al-Ain al-Haq is what the Prophet has actually said in one of his hadiths, which means that there is this, I would call this psychosomatic phenomena which relates to parapsychology and which science has yet to fully decipher, that at times uh, physical things have psychological effects. So, to give you an example, whenever we praise someone, the other person starts blushing. He becomes red. He or she turns red. She has this flash of blood in him or her. So this is how at times words affect the other person. So physical things affect your psychology, your psyche. So this is an example that at times when we are angry, when we are sad, when we praise someone, this is a physical phenomena. But the effect on the other person is a psychological thing. That when we praise someone, he or she becomes happy. When we uh, uh, discourage someone, he or she contorts his or her face, and that sadness is aware. The heartbeat starts to increase, the blood pressure starts to increase. So physical effects also get the better of us. So it seems that in a similar way, our psyche gets affected by words as well, and this causes certain things in us that are yet unknown, and science has yet to discover them. And hence, whenever we think that there is something wrong with us, we think that the issue of the evil eye has come upon us, and then it is here that we become superstitious. And then we do all sorts of things. We read, we recite things which maybe peers or pundits of this field actually prescribe for us. They have a number of remedies which they suggest. They're more like quack remedies. And then we start indulging in all sorts of things because we think that someone has inflicted us with his or her evil eye. And hence, if things are going wrong, if things are going extremely bad in our house or something evil is happening, we tend to attribute it to this evil eye. And this can also be extended to, for example, to magic and to other witchcraft things related to witchcraft and other occult sciences in which we might think that we are defenseless, and either we have someone has cast a spell on us, or maybe that evil eye is working. So, first of all, as I said, that you need to understand that as far as this issue itself is concerned, religion does not negate it. It does not say that this is something which cannot happen. The Prophet himself, while expressing his own experience of the Arabian society, says that has said that this is something which does happen. And as far as its remedy is concerned, if we look at the Quran and some of the narratives of the Prophet himself, we see that not only the Almighty, but the Prophet himself has suggested certain supplications, certain du'as to bring us into the refuge of the Almighty and to ask Him to become our protector. So, therefore, I think we should confine ourselves to those du'as, to those supplications. And moreover, if we think that something more has to be done, then we should stay in the state of ceremonial ablution or wuzu as far as possible. So whenever our wuzu breaks, we can redo it so that that spiritual purification is always with us. But other than that, I think that instead of doing all sorts of things and indulging in all sorts of superstitions that we do, the Quranic prescription for this is that we should adhere to the last two surahs of the Quran, which are called the Mu'awwizatain, Surah Falak and Surah Nas. And if you read the words of these surahs, you will realize that they basically give us in the protection of the Almighty from all sorts of things that against which we are defenseless and we have no idea what's happening. And then we have certain supplications of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like for example, "A'udhu bi izzatillahi wa qudratihi min sharri ma ajid," that I give myself in the refuge of the Almighty from the evil that I find in my own self, or the bad thing that I find in my own self. There are other supplications as well, of course, which the Prophet has prescribed. But the thing that would like to express here and to emphasize here is that whenever we think that there is something bad happening to our body and we are not actually being able to diagnose it, first of all, we need to go to a good doctor for that, because many ailments are physical disability or physical ailments, and a good doctor can diagnose our physical ailments. However, when in spite of going to a good doctor and in spite of going through a whole procedure, a remedial procedure in which we take medicines, in spite of that, if we still think that there is something wrong that is not being properly diagnosed, maybe, or something psychologically is affecting us, and the doctor is not able to grasp it, we can have this inkling and we can have this understanding that maybe someone has inflicted us with an evil eye, or perhaps even has cast a spell on us. But again, as I said, that the remedy for this is to remain in a state of ablution as far as possible, and to keep on reciting the last two surahs of the Quran, which actually, if you understand their meanings, are made to give ourselves in the protection of the Almighty, and also as someone who is in his refuge. And as I said, that this can be supplemented through some of the supplications which the Prophet himself has prescribed. So this is as far as this misconception is concerned. My concern is that we should not indulge in any superstition. Superstition always leads us away from the Almighty. Superstitions always make our faith weak. In fact, themselves is a manifestation of the fact that we have a weak faith. We have to understand that if something is happening, that we are not able to do so, in spite of the fact that we are praying to the Almighty and reciting the Mu'awwidhatayn and other du'as, then at times, as I said earlier on once, that the Quran has said, وَمَا هُمْ بِضَارِّينَ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ, which means that if something does happen in spite of all this, then the Almighty has actually allowed it to happen, and it is then a case or a situation of test and trials that the Almighty wants us to go through. So that's another thing that we need to understand, that nothing can inflict us unless it is the will of the Almighty. And if in spite of all our efforts, this still continues, and we need to take it as a test and a trial, and keep on uh, adhering to the to righteousness as far as possible, and to come make it a means of coming closer to the Almighty. So, viewers, this brings us to an end to the second session as well. My request specifically here is that we must not be act superstitiously in these situations, because this is the greatest test of our faith. And when some of things of these sort happen, we do tend to lose this trust in the Almighty and start doing all sorts of things which have no basis in religion, which are absolutely proscribed in religion, and we, without realizing it at times, we end up doing a lot of harm to our own selves. So this brings us to an end to the second session as well. And if in case we can now, of course, open up the floor to general questions as well. If you have questions relating to this particular misconception, we can discuss them as well. And if there are other misconceptions or other questions, so please go ahead. So I can see Asir Zahur. Asir, I'm unmuting your mic. Please go ahead.
Assalamualaikum, sir.
The Islam. Could you please speak a little louder?
I'm trying. So my question is
Yes, Asir. Asir, you will go ahead.
can
Asir, we cannot hear you. Hello? Asir, we are not able to hear you.
Hello?
Yes? Please go ahead. We are not being able to hear you. Okay, in the meantime that you're fixing your mic, I'm going to answer another question which is uh, raised by Mr. Mateen Tahir. He says that kindly give me some advice so that my post-death period is shining. And okay, you see, I think that all of us as human beings, all of us as believers in the Almighty, have this intense desire to succeed in the hereafter and to end up in the hereafter as people who are able to win paradise, enter the kingdom of heaven, enter the kingdom of paradise. And I think there is just one very, very important advice which I would give you. And I would say that this forms the basis of all things. And that is that we should always remain a true seeker of the truth. So if the quest for the truth is the most important mission in life for us, this would mean that whenever some true thing, some truth comes our way, we accept it. We do not deny it. We not only do not deny it, we in fact support it. We go along it. We follow it. And the Almighty has guaranteed for us that if we do not deliberately do something bad, deliberately do something which is against our conscience, maybe it could be a slip, it could be something that we do out of ignorance or even out of emotions, that can be forgiven. But if we do remain seekers of the truth, then this is the biggest challenge that we face. That whenever something comes along which might be against our own interest, which might be against the interest of our parents or our relatives, but it is the truth. It is what justice says, and we uphold it, we accept it. And I think this is what Almighty expects from us to do. And it is this attitude which will, inshallah, lead us to the kingdom of paradise. So the bottom line is that the truth We have to be seekers of the truth. We must disregard from where the truth is coming from. We must concentrate on the truth itself. And when we say truth, of course, it means anything which relates to haq, which relates to reality, which relates to what the actual thing is. This is my advice to you. Uh, Asir Zahur, you can, if you're now, kindly go ahead with your question. So, Asir, your mic is now unmuted. I can see that your mic is now unmuted. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
I can faintly hear you. If you could just raise your voice, please.
I'm speaking loud. I don't know that there is a problem with the I don't know the speakers. So my question is, was this is regarding circumcision, sir. So was circumcision always considered a sunan? Was it always a
Yes, it
tradition
was.
of the prophets, or
Was. It started off with Abraham. We know this is from the Bible. Abraham was
yes?
circumcised, and because we do not have the history of prophets prior to Abraham, we do understand that this must have been the case with the previous prophets as well. But as far as known history is concerned, we know that Abraham was circumcised, and he was circumcised at a much later age in life. To be precise, according to the Bible, he was 86 years old when this happened. So, and then from there on, this tradition was given currency. And the reason for this is again this hygiene and cleanliness, because the non-circumcised part does tend to hold drops of urine in it, and it's difficult to totally clean it at all times. So that is why it was deemed necessary that that particular part, that small piece, must be uh, circumcised. So this is something which has its hygienic importance, and it is it started off to the best of our knowledge. I mean, to what we can say as stated knowledge from the Prophet Abraham. But as I said, that since this is something which relates to all the prophets of God, as do all these directives, we do believe that it must have begun much earlier.
Sir, adding on to that, uh, sir, the Islam is also considered as Deen Fitrat. We say it is also
Right.
um, yeah. And the tradition by the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was that al fitratu khamsin, sir. First one is al khitan, circumcision.
Hmm.
So if a man is born with a if a man is born as uncircumcised,
Hmm.
wouldn't it be the natural to be like that? Cleanliness is we understand cleanliness to be part of natural, but prescribing
Asir,
circumcision to that.
I have to
If a
interrupt.
man is
We are not able to hear you. Your voice is not clear. Maybe there is something wrong with your internet connection, because uh, all that we could hear are certain sounds which don't make any coherent sense. So kindly please check your connection.
sir, can you hear me now?
Well, we start to hear you and then your voice dies away. It comes and goes. Your voice comes and goes. I think there is some. As I said, that your voice does come and then it certainly suddenly disappears.
So my question is, if a man is born, his natural disposition when he's born uncircumcised, then cleanliness is an understandable part of religion. Why should God prescribe with circumcision?
I'm sorry, Asif, something is really
So
wrong because we are not being able to hear you.
I'll take the question.
You can write the question in the chat box. In the meantime, if anyone else would like to ask a question, please let me know. You can just show your hand, and the mic will be unmuted. Uh, so I'm waiting for your question. Can I ask the admin to kindly see if okay, there's a question which says that if a revert is uncircumcised, what do you suggest? I think this is a case of special import, and I would not recommend an adult uncircumcised to revert to circumcise himself, because this is especially a directive which is given in the wake of a newborn baby or a newborn boy. So this would should be mandatory at that time. But I don't think that if a person is reverts to Islam at a later stage in life, then it is something that he should do. If medically it is possible without any problem, but that perhaps that he can go for the procedure. Otherwise, if there is some medical complication, which I believe so is there in adult age, then this is something which hopefully will be a very legitimate excuse in front of the Almighty. Because, as I said, this particular directive is given to the newborn for the newborns, and this is a special case that you have asked here. So my recommendation would be that if this is something of a medical complication, then this should be avoided. Otherwise, if it is medically possible, the procedure can be done without any pain being inflicted, then perhaps you can go for it. I have another question which says that uh, belief in hadith, is that considered mandatory? Islam is considered as Deen Fitra. Okay, that's the next question. A man is born uncircumcised. Why would? Okay, let me answer this second question first because we are dealing with this topic. You see, when it is said that Islam is fitra, it actually means that what something which is in our own human nature is so close to our understanding that when we hear these directives, we find that our own nature is very close to it. That, for example, all morality is in our fitra, in our nature. So whenever we see people doing good deeds, people acting justly, people speaking the truth, people being kind and compassionate, our own fitra means that it vouches for the fact that we are doing the right thing. So when we say that Islam is a religion which is based on fitra, it actually means that the realities which are found in our fitra, which are found in our nature, they are something which are acknowledged immediately by our own selves because we find themselves very close to nature. So this is what is meant by the fact that Islam is close to our nature. As far as circumcision is concerned, this is an entirely different thing. This is like saying that, okay, if the hairs start to grow, then why should we cut our hair? I mean, why should we comb our hair? Because combing is something is different. Why shouldn't we let our hair grow right down to our shoulders and even beyond that? And why should we cut our nails? And why should we, for example, make ourselves trim and smart? So these things, as far as this logic is concerned, would also stop us from cutting our hair or maybe cutting our nails as well. because this is how we need to understand that when we say that Islam is a religion of fitra, it actually refers to the facts or the things which are found in our own human nature. And the foremost of these is these moral values that we have. So, Asir, I hope that I have answered your question. Let me know if you need any further clarification. And in the meantime, let me answer the next question, which says that is it essential for me to believe in a hadith? First of all, we need to understand what a hadith actually is. You see, hadith is the knowledge of the Prophet, which has been transferred to us by various means through some of the narrators, and it has reached us. And now there are of course, tools of historical criticism through which we are able to judge the veracity to the best of our competence and we understand it. So, as far as the hadith is concerned, if we think that it is reliably reported from the Prophet and that reliability has been tested, then yes, it is mandatory to believe in that hadith because the Prophet is presenting religion to us. And when something relates to religion and it is also transmitted to us through reliable means, then something which is the knowledge of the Prophet and it comes to us, then it is mandatory for us. But of course, something which is mandatory for us as far as the narrative is concerned, this could be there could be a possibility that another person does not accept it because simply in his research that particular narrative is not established or is not authentically reported. So, as far as hadith is concerned, it is mandatory upon all those who think that it has been reliably reported. Other people who challenge the reliability, of course, have their own view that since this narrative has not been reliably reported, therefore they do not believe in it. But yes, if it is reliably reported, and we do think that as far as the reliable reporting is concerned, it is there, and of course, it is not against the Quran, it's not against established principles, it's not against the Sunnah, and not against common sense, which are all the tools of criticism which we have been told by the Muhaddisun, then yes, it is obligatory to follow that hadith. Could you please? I think there is this problem with this my chat box because it's okay. It says my understanding fails to understand parts of the Waqia Isra, the Prophet's back and forth between Asmans to the sky. You see, you need to understand as far as the incident of Isra is concerned, the Quran never says that it's a physical journey. The Quran says that this is something which occurred in the dream of the Prophet. The Surah Bani Israel, which is the 17th Surah, if you study it later on in the Surah, the very first verse describes this journey, but later on it says, "Wama ja'alna ru'ya allati araynaka illa fitnatan linnas." Remember, the dream that we showed you of Prophet was a means to try out the other people. So this is how the Quran itself says. So if your understanding regarding parts of the Isra incident is concerned, that you need to check upon the Quran itself. It does never says that it was a physical journey. It was more of a spiritual journey which occurred in the dream of the Prophet, in which he was symbolically shown certain things which were meant as glad tidings for him for the future. So I think that if you need to consult a tafsir for this, it would be the Tabure Quran, which I would prescribe of Maulana Amin Yasir Islahi. It is available online. Kindly do consult it as far as this incident is concerned of Surah Bani Israel, and perhaps you'll be more satisfied with his explanation. So, viewers, I think that we have finished all the questions. I don't see any more hands raised, and we can now perhaps end our session. Let me just double check. Okay, So this brings us to an end to this session of our study circle. Inshallah, hope to see you next Saturday, same time. Until then, it's Khuda Hafiz.